I've had enough of the HOA. Honestly, I never thought it would come to this, but here we are. My name's Richard, and I've lived in this quiet suburban neighborhood for over 20 years. I moved here hoping to find peace, a little space away from the city, and a neighborhood where neighbors could wave at each other without the pressures of traffic, noise, or politics. Little did I know, peace comes with a price, and that price is the Homeowners Association. When I first moved in, the HOA was just another group of people who made sure the lawns looked nice and the neighborhood was kept up. No big deal. That was the plan, right? Keep things neat and orderly. But it didn't take long before I realized the HOA had its claws deep in the lives of everyone here. Rules started to pop up, ridiculous things, like how high your grass could be, how many cars you could park in your driveway, and, God forbid, if you dared to put a flagpole in your front yard. Imagine this. You come home to find your heating line welded shut, your property violated without your consent, all because a power-hungry HOA president decided she could control everything. Furious doesn't even begin to describe how I felt. As Karen and her crew thought they could get away with it, I made my move, and what happened next? Well, it was game on. They thought they had the power. I was about to show them how wrong they were. Welcome back to Confessions of HOA. If you're new here, make sure to like and subscribe. At first, I didn't mind. I was happy to keep things nice. But then things started escalating. First, it was a fine for having a garden too close to the sidewalk. Then, a warning about my mailbox being a few inches too far from the curb. It was small stuff, but I could feel the undercurrent of control, of power, of someone watching over you like you were a child in their classroom. And that someone was Karen, the HOA president. She's in her early 40s, sharp, confident, and to put it simply, a woman who believes the world revolves around her. A self-proclaimed neighborhood mom. She sees herself as the one who keeps everything in line. You could almost admire the ambition if it wasn't so self-serving. Karen's methods aren't just about keeping the place clean, they're about control. She manipulates, she bullies, and if you cross her, well, you'd better watch out. The tipping point came when Karen started pushing for changes that affected me directly, like the new rule about home heating systems. Out of nowhere, she decided that everyone needed to modernize their heating lines, and that included me. I'd had the same system for years, and it worked perfectly fine. But Karen, in her infinite wisdom, decided that my heating line had to be updated. I wasn't the only one, either. She insisted on this for the entire block. The next thing I knew, workers were at my door, tearing up the system, without so much as an explanation. They told me that it was policy, something about safety concerns and community uniformity. But what really boiled my blood was when I found out what they'd done. Karen and her people had welded my heating line shut. Just like that. I'd never given them permission to do anything to my property, yet they took it upon themselves to tamper with something that was none of their business. That wasn't just an inconvenience, it was an insult. And for the first time, I realized how far she was willing to go to assert her control. I had to bite my tongue. The old me wanted to go out there, rip into Karen, and fix everything with one angry confrontation. But I knew that wouldn't solve anything. I had to be smart about this. I had to wait, to be patient. If I was going to make my stand, it couldn't be a reckless move. It had to be calculated. And that's when I realized how I would get her. I wasn't going to fight fire with fire. No, I was going to outsmart her, use her own rules and her arrogance against her. But first, I needed to know everything about the HOA system, about Karen, about what I could legally do. I'd play the game, but I'd play it better than she ever could. I couldn't let her get away with this, not anymore. But before I could put my plan into motion, something unexpected happened, something that would change the entire course of this battle. And that's when I knew. Karen was about to make her biggest mistake yet. Before I got tangled up in the web of HOA rules and petty authority, life was simpler. A little quieter, too. I had always been someone who valued peace, order, and the stability that comes from living in a place where people respect one another's space. I'm not one for grand statements or big gestures, but I do believe in the little things, like keeping your lawn tidy, maintaining your home, and not bothering your neighbors. That's what I was looking for when I moved here, to this sleepy suburban neighborhood. I spent most of my life in the city, years of working in finance, a job that kept me on my toes and, honestly, a little bit too stressed. It was a good life, or at least that's what I thought. But after a while, the noise, the traffic, the constant buzz of city life started to weigh on me. I couldn't hear myself think anymore. I couldn't even remember the last time I sat outside without the sound of honking horns or sirens in the background. The city was suffocating, and I needed a change. So, I decided to move. I wanted to find somewhere quieter, somewhere with enough space to breathe again. Somewhere that felt like a fresh start. I'd heard about this neighborhood from a friend of a friend. It was just far enough outside the city to feel like a retreat, but still close enough for work. I came out one weekend, drove around, and instantly felt at home. There was something peaceful about it. The trees lined up along the roads, the well-kept lawns, the kids playing in the streets, and the general sense of calm. It wasn't perfect, but it was everything I was looking for. A simple life. A retreat. I bought my home and moved in within the next couple of months. For the first time in years, I felt like I could exhale. My wife, Linda, and I settled in. She loved the peace too. Less noise, more time to relax in the garden. It was the kind of place where you could sit outside on a summer evening and just enjoy the silence, with only the occasional sound of a neighbor's lawnmower or a dog barking in the distance. It felt like we'd finally found the life we'd been looking for. I didn't realize then that finding peace would require more effort than I ever imagined. For the first few years, everything was fine. The neighbors were friendly enough, and the community seemed tight-knit. There were the usual neighborhood events, barbecues, block parties, the occasional dispute over something trivial. But for the most part, it was what I thought it should be. A calm, suburban existence. But then came the HOA. They started off small, just a few meetings every now and then, a few flyers about keeping the neighborhood looking nice. I didn't pay much attention at first. I wasn't one for committees, especially not ones that wanted to dictate how I lived. But little by little, they started showing up more often, sending more letters, enforcing more rules. At first, they were about minor things, where we could park, how high our grass could be, and whether our fence was the right shade of beige. Ridiculous things that, on their own, didn't matter much. But I could feel it. The power they were gaining. The control they were slowly taking over everyone's life. And I was getting tired of it. Linda would joke about it at first. It's just a few rules. Rich, no need to make it a big deal. But I could see the changes in her too. Her frustration grew every time the HOA sent us one of those letters with another fine or warning for some new violation they'd found. It was as if they were looking for reasons to make us follow their every command. Then came the day when I first had to deal with Karen, the HOA president. She came to my door one afternoon, all smiles at first, talking about how much she appreciated the efforts I was making to keep my lawn pristine and how my house was a great asset to the neighborhood. But then she slipped in the real reason for her visit. I just wanted to remind you about the new regulations for home heating lines. We'll be requiring all homes to upgrade their systems to be compliant with our community standards. I remember looking at her, hearing the words, and thinking, here we go again. She told me about the new safety measures, how they were going to update my heating system as part of a neighborhood-wide initiative. At that moment, I felt the frustration bubbling inside me. I wanted to tell her to leave and mind her own business, but I kept calm. After all, she wasn't physically forcing me to do anything yet. But what really set me off wasn't her request. It was when she looked me in the eye and said, "You know, Richard, these measures are for the good of the community. You wouldn't want to be the only one who's not in compliance, would you?" It wasn't a question. It was a threat, a veiled one, but a threat nonetheless. I smiled, nodded, and promised her I'd look into it. But inside, I was already planning my next move. I wasn't going to let Karen or the HOA push me around anymore. I valued my property and my rights too much to let them dictate how I lived. I never thought something as trivial as a heating line could spark a battle that would consume everything I stood for. But when they welded it shut, that's when I knew this was bigger than just me. The first time I saw it, I thought I was hallucinating. I came home from work one evening, tired and looking forward to a quiet dinner with Linda. It had been a long day at the office, numbers, emails, meetings, the usual grind. But when I pulled into the driveway, something felt off. I walked up to the front door, my mind wandering, and that's when I saw it. The maintenance crew had parked their van in front of my house. No warning, no heads up. I hadn't agreed to anything. Hell, I hadn't even been informed. At first, I figured maybe they were just doing a routine inspection of the neighborhood, something harmless. But as I got closer to the side of the house, I saw what they were working on, my heating line. The very one Karen had mentioned, The one she'd insisted I needed to update to comply with community standards. They were welding it shut. I stopped in my tracks, my stomach dropping. I could hear the faint hiss of the welder's torch and the clang of metal. There was no way I had given them permission to do this. I turned to one of the workers and asked, "What's going on here?" The man didn't even look up at me. He simply nodded toward the van, where another worker was making adjustments to the pipe. "The HOA's orders, sir. We've been instructed to secure all the heating systems." I stood there for a moment, trying to process what was happening. They were actually working on my property without my consent, welding shut my heating line as though it was some kind of routine maintenance, part of some grand HOA plan to modernize the entire neighborhood. I couldn't believe it. The audacity of it. I stepped forward, my voice steadier than I felt. "You can't do this. I never signed anything. I never agreed to this." The man paused, looked at me briefly, then went back to his work. "It's HOA policy, sir. We're just following instructions." And that was it. He didn't care. He wasn't there to argue. He was there to get the job done. I stood there for a moment longer, watching the sparks fly from the welder's torch, and I felt the rage build up in my chest. It wasn't just the welding. It was the principle of it all. They were invading my space, my property, with no warning, no respect. The HOA had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to just stand by and let it happen. I stormed inside to find Linda. I could feel my blood pressure rising as I opened the door, but I had to explain to her what was going on. I couldn't believe it was happening. "Linda," I started, my voice tight. "They've welded my heating line shut. I didn't approve this. They didn't even ask." She looked at me, her expression a mix of confusion and concern. "What do you mean, welded it shut? They've taken it upon themselves to come into our yard and mess with our property. This isn't about rules anymore. This is about control." She didn't say anything right away, and I could tell she was processing it, trying to make sense of it all. She knew how much I hated the HOA, how much I disliked the idea of someone telling me how to live. But even she couldn't believe it had escalated this far. I tried to calm myself, to think through what I should do next. But the truth was, I had no idea. I couldn't just let this go. I couldn't let them get away with treating my property like it was theirs. It wasn't just an inconvenience anymore, it was sabotage. But as much as I wanted to march down there, confront Karen, and demand an explanation, I knew that wasn't the right move. I had to be smarter than that. I had to think this through. The last thing I wanted was to get into a shouting match with Karen. She'd just use it against me, twist it, make me the problem. No, I had to take my time, be strategic. I paced the house, running through the legalities in my mind. What were my rights here? What could I do? I had a decent understanding of property law, but this wasn't just about the heating line anymore. It was about everything the HOA had done. They'd overstepped, and it was time for them to pay the price. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. She had no idea what she was messing with. This wasn't just about one line. This was about standing up for my property rights, for my freedom. I wasn't just going to fight them. I was going to outsmart them. The game was on, and this time, I would be the one setting the rules. I spent the next few days in a haze of quiet determination. The heat of my frustration was still simmering just beneath the surface, but I knew that reacting impulsively wouldn't get me anywhere. I needed to take control of this situation with precision and patience. That's when I decided to start digging into everything I could about the HOA, Karen, and my rights. I wasn't going to let her off easy. First, I focused on the technical side of things, the plumbing. The heating line wasn't just a random pipe. It was part of my home, my property, and Karen had no right to tamper with it. I called a few plumbers just to get a second opinion on the legality of what had been done. I was careful, subtle. I didn't want to tip anyone off yet. After a few conversations, one plumber mentioned something about home improvement regulations and how an HOA couldn't just change someone's property without express consent. That was the first crack in Karen's armor. I jotted down notes, made a few calls to other homeowners in the area, and sure enough, I wasn't the only one who had been subject to Karen's improvements. One neighbor, Frank, mentioned that they'd also forced him to install a new HVAC system, even though his old one was fine. Another woman, Sarah, had been fined because her flower bed was an inch too close to the curb. This wasn't about community standards. This was about Karen flexing her power, making people bend to her will for no reason other than control. As I gathered more information, my strategy began to take shape. I wasn't going to confront her directly, at least not yet. I was going to let her dig her own grave. I was going to gather evidence. Hard, irrefutable evidence. And I would play the game on my terms. I couldn't just trust my own experience. I needed to cover all my bases. I started by researching HOA regulations, property rights, and anything I could find on overreach in these kinds of cases. I knew there had to be some legal loophole, something that would expose Karen for what she was doing. She had made a serious misstep by messing with my property without consent, and I was going to make sure it came back to bite her. One late night, I sat at my desk, the glow of the computer screen illuminating the room. I scoured HOA law, looking for something, anything, that would give me the upper hand. There were long articles, dense legalese that made my head spin, but I kept pushing forward. And then, I found it. A clause about home ownership and personal property rights that specifically stated homeowners had the right to protect their property from unauthorized alterations, even by an HOA. It was clear now. Karen had crossed a line. I could challenge her actions, but I had to do it carefully. I knew the HOA would try to brush this off as a simple misunderstanding or a mistake, but that wasn't going to work for me. I had the law on my side, and I was going to use it. The more I researched, the more I realized just how deep the HOA's influence went. Karen wasn't just a busybody. She was a manipulator who used the HOA to control every aspect of the neighborhood. She knew exactly what she was doing, and it was becoming clear that if I didn't take action soon, she'd continue pushing her agenda on all of us. I started to think about how I'd approach this. I couldn't rush in with guns blazing. I had to gather more evidence, document every single incident where the HOA had overstepped its bounds. The key was to move quickly, but carefully, before Karen caught wind of what I was up to. I decided to reach out to a few neighbors, the ones I'd spoken to earlier. I wanted to form a network of people who were also fed up with the HOA, people who would stand with me when the time came. I didn't need an army, just a few good allies who could help back up my claims. I had to make sure that when I took my stand, I wasn't alone. As I sat down to organize my thoughts, a plan began to solidify. I wasn't just going to challenge Karen on the heating line issue. No, this was bigger than that. I was going to expose her for the fraud she was, a tyrant hiding behind the title of HOA president. The heating line was just the beginning. I play by the rules, outsmart her at her own game. I wasn't going to resort to violence or aggression. No, I was smarter than that. I'd use their own bureaucracy, their own regulations, against them. I knew Karen would underestimate me. She'd think I was just another homeowner trying to avoid the rules. But what she didn't know was that I was going to use the very system she relied on to make her look like a fool. I felt a calmness settle over me as I thought through the details. This wasn't about revenge. It was about standing up for what was mine and ensuring Karen couldn't get away with her petty tyrannies. But time was ticking. I had to move quickly before she figured out what I was up to. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. She had no idea what she was messing with. I wasn't some passive homeowner waiting to be pushed around. No, I was going to turn the tables. And Karen was going to regret underestimating me. But before I could make my next move, I needed one more thing. Something that would be the key to my success. And I was going to get it, before Karen even knew what hit her. The night before, I sat in my study, reviewing everything I had learned. HOA regulations, property laws, and the loophole I'd uncovered. The tension was building, but I kept my focus. The plan was set, and tomorrow, I would take the first step. The morning came quickly. I grabbed my jacket and walked out the door, taking a deep breath as I felt the cool air of the early morning brush against my skin. My house, my property, felt more like mine than ever before. Today, I wasn't just a homeowner. Today, I was taking my stand. I had already made sure everything was in place. I'd gathered the tools I needed the night before, a wrench, some gloves, and a few simple supplies. The heating valve I'd been thinking about for days was the key, the very valve that had been tampered with by the HOA's workers. That valve was the point of no return. If I locked it, I would neutralize their sabotage. It was a nonviolent act, calculated and precise, but it would send a clear message to Karen and her band of control freaks. I approached the side of the house, my heart beating steadily, but my mind calm. The valve was located in the small utility space beside my garage, out of sight, tucked away, and hidden from most of the neighborhood. I had made sure I knew exactly where it was. Nobody would see me, and nobody would hear me. The cold metal of the valve felt strange in my hands, almost like the beginning of something monumental. I wasn't just locking a valve. I was locking down my response to years of intrusion. The HOA had crossed too many lines, and this was my retaliation. This was how I was going to fight back. I crouched down, carefully turning the valve and tightening it. The act itself was simple, but the symbolism was powerful. It was a quiet defiance, and I relished in the calm satisfaction that followed. The sabotage was now useless. If they tried to do anything with the system again, they would find themselves hitting a brick wall. As I stood back up and looked at the valve, I couldn't help but smile. I wasn't being reckless. I wasn't tearing things apart. I was simply protecting my property, taking my first step in regaining control. I wasn't going to let Karen or the HOA bully me anymore. I walked back to my front door slowly, as if savoring the moment. Inside, Linda was finishing breakfast, unaware of what I had just done. I didn't tell her immediately. I didn't need to. I could see her expression when she finally found out. She didn't have to be told. She'd know it wasn't just about a heating line. This was about something bigger, about standing up for what was right. That afternoon, I saw a couple of neighbors walking by, glancing curiously at my house. It wasn't unusual for people to stroll through the neighborhood, but something about their glances made me think they were starting to notice. I knew it wasn't just the usual walk by. It was the effect of something else, something they didn't quite understand yet. Sure enough, a few hours later, a knock came at my door. I opened it, and there stood Jim, a neighbor who lived a few houses down. He was holding his clipboard, looking a little awkward. "Hey, Richard," he started. "I was just talking with some of the guys, and I heard about the work they were doing around here. Something about the heating system? Was that you?" I could see where this was going, and I played it cool, not giving away anything more than I had to. "Yeah, I had to make a few changes," I said. "Just a precaution. Nothing major." Jim nodded, but I could tell he was confused. I knew he was trying to figure out if I was involved in something bigger, something he didn't quite understand. But I had already taken the first step, and now I just had to wait. Let them try to figure it out. Let Karen come at me with whatever she had planned. She had no idea what she was dealing with. The next day, I heard the sound of trucks outside. I peeked out the window and saw the HOA's maintenance crew again. But this time, their faces were different. They were confused, looking around, talking to each other in hushed voices. They approached the utility space and started to examine the heating system, but I could already see the frustration on their faces. They couldn't do anything. The line was locked, completely useless to them. It felt almost surreal, watching them fumble with their tools, trying to get things back to normal. But they couldn't. They had no way of getting past what I had done. The power had shifted, and Karen's little empire was crumbling, one step at a time. But I wasn't done. Not yet. I had made my move, but Karen's response was coming, and I knew she wouldn't go down quietly. She'd have something in store to try to intimidate me. She wouldn't take this lightly, not after everything she'd built with the HOA. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. She had no idea what she was messing with. Karen's next move was coming, and I knew that whatever she tried, she wouldn't be prepared for the real game I was playing. It didn't take long for Karen to retaliate. A few days after the valve incident, I received a letter from the HOA. It was official looking, with the HOA logo at the top, and I could feel my pulse quicken as I ripped it open. The letter was short but sharp. They were demanding that I immediately fix the unauthorized alteration to the heating system. It stated that I was in violation of HOA rules and could face significant fines if I didn't comply. But this wasn't just a letter. This was Karen's first shot across the bow. She knew exactly what she was doing, trying to scare me, trying to make me back down. But she had underestimated me. I wasn't some passive homeowner who would roll over at the first sign of trouble. I wasn't going to let her bully me into submission. The next day, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Karen standing on the porch, a forced smile plastered across her face. "Richard," she said sweetly, "I think we need to talk." I didn't invite her in. I wasn't in the mood for pleasantries. "What's this about, Karen?" I asked, my voice calm, but there was an edge to it that I couldn't hide. She glanced down at the paper she was holding, then back at me. "You've really made things difficult, haven't you?" she said, her voice turning colder. "You're going to regret this. The HOA has rules, Richard, and I'll make sure you follow them, one way or another." Her words hung in the air, and I could feel the heat rising in my chest, but I kept my composure. "I've done nothing wrong, Karen. I'm just protecting my property from unnecessary interference." She scoffed, clearly not impressed by my calmness. "You've made this personal, Richard, you think you can just ignore the rules, but I won't let you get away with it. We'll bring legal action if we have to. The board will back me. It wasn't the first threat Karen had made, but there was something different about this one. This time, I could tell she was genuinely pissed off. And when Karen was angry, she wasn't just going to let it slide. She was going to make me pay. Do what you have to do, I said, keeping my voice steady. I'm not backing down. She narrowed her eyes, clearly trying to read me, but I held my ground. Karen left soon after, but I knew she wasn't done. She was going to escalate this, and I was ready for whatever she threw at me. The next few days felt like the calm before the storm. I went about my business as usual, but the tension in the air was palpable. I could feel Karen's presence looming over everything. She was a woman who didn't like being challenged, and I could tell she was scheming, plotting her next move. But then, something unexpected happened. The neighbors, those who had been quiet at first, started reaching out. Frank came over one morning, a little nervous but eager to talk. You know, Richard, he began, I've been thinking about what you did. And I want to say I don't agree with what the HOA is doing to you. I've had my run-ins with them too. They've pushed me around for years, but I didn't have the guts to do anything about it. I stared at him for a moment, unsure of what he was getting at. What do you mean? Well, Frank continued, I've seen the way Karen operates. She's been manipulating the whole neighborhood for a long time, using the HOA as her weapon. But I think you're right. This isn't just about a heating line. This is about the way she's been treating all of us. We don't have to put up with it anymore. I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe I wasn't alone in this after all. So what are you saying? I asked. I'm saying I'm with you, Richard. I'll stand by you. You're not the only one she's been messing with. The conversation with Frank gave me the first real sense of solidarity in weeks. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all of us. Frank wasn't the only one. Over the next few days, a few other neighbors, people I'd barely spoken to before, came forward, sharing their frustrations with the HOA and Karen's constant overreach. It was like a domino effect. One by one, they started speaking up, not directly at me, but among themselves. It became clear that Karen had been alienating more people than she realized. She thought she had the power, but her manipulation was starting to unravel. The more people came forward, the more I realized I wasn't fighting this battle alone. But Karen wasn't going to back down, and she wasn't going to admit defeat. She came back a few days later, her demeanor more formal this time. You've made this much harder than it had to be, she said, her voice dripping with passive-aggressive charm. You've got people thinking they can challenge the HOA. Richard, that's not going to happen. I've already arranged for a team of contractors to come by and fix the valve. You can either cooperate or we'll take legal action. I felt a surge of frustration, but I held it in check. You've already tried to fix it once, Karen. What's the difference this time? This time, we'll be doing it right, she snapped. We'll handle it the way it should have been handled from the beginning. I could see right through her. She wasn't trying to fix anything. She was trying to force me into submission. But what she didn't realize was that every move she made was just setting her up for her downfall. I knew what she was doing. She was bringing in contractors again to do what they failed to do the first time. But this time, I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I had made my move, and now she was about to make hers. I wasn't going to stop her, but I was going to make sure that when the time came, she'd be the one who would regret underestimating me. Karen thought she could intimidate me, but she was wrong. This wasn't about the heating line anymore. This was about something bigger, and Karen was about to find out just how far I was willing to go. I could already feel the tension building, and I knew it was only a matter of time before things reached a boiling point. The next move would be hers, but I was ready. And when it came, I would be the one in control. It had been a few days since Karen's latest attempt to strong-arm me with the contractors, and things were starting to feel like a standoff. The tension between us was palpable, but Karen had underestimated something crucial. She didn't know I was gathering my own allies, people who were just as tired of her overreach as I was. I hadn't expected to find an ally so soon. In fact, I didn't even know who would be on my side. After all, the HOA had a way of making everyone afraid to speak out. But that afternoon, as I sat on the porch, my mind swirling with plans, I saw someone walking toward me. Someone I hadn't expected to ever approach me in any way. It was Ben. Ben lived a few doors down from me, in one of the bigger houses on the block. I had seen him around, of course. He'd always kept to himself, a quiet, unassuming guy in his late 40s who worked as a local contractor. I had always thought of him as a bit of a recluse, but after seeing him wave a few times at HOA meetings, I figured he was just another guy who didn't want to get involved. But as he walked up my driveway, I could see something in his eyes that I hadn't expected: determination, maybe even a touch of defiance. "Hey, Richard," he said, as I stood to greet him, still unsure of what he wanted. "Ben, hey, what's up?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. He didn't waste any time. "I've been watching what's been going on with the HOA. The whole thing with the heating line. That wasn't just an accident, was it?" I blinked, taken aback by his directness. "No, it wasn't. But I'm guessing you've got an idea of what this is really about." He glanced around quickly, as if to make sure no one was listening. "I've been dealing with Karen and the HOA for years," he said quietly. "I know how she operates. I'm not here to get involved, but I've seen enough. I know you're not the only one she's been messing with." I was quiet for a moment, processing what he was saying. This was unexpected, to say the least. I had never spoken to Ben about the HOA, let alone asked him for help. And now here he was, apparently offering something I hadn't anticipated. "So, you know about her?" I asked, my voice cautious. "What exactly do you mean?" Ben lowered his voice even more. "I've been trying to keep my head down, keep out of the drama, but I can't stand seeing her get away with this anymore. The way she manipulates the HOA, the way she's used the board to control the neighborhood, it's wrong. I've seen her make deals with contractors, change rules at will, and pull strings to get people to back down." I stared at him, stunned. "She's been pulling strings with contractors?" He nodded. "Oh yeah, I've seen her get contractors to do things they weren't supposed to do, all to make her look good or punish people who've crossed her. I've overheard enough at the community meetings to know what she's up to, but no one's been brave enough to stand up to her. Until now, apparently." I couldn't help but feel a wave of gratitude mixed with suspicion. I had to admit, this was a game changer. Ben knew things that could really give me the edge against Karen. But I was still cautious. I couldn't afford to trust just anyone. "I'm not saying I don't appreciate the offer, Ben," I said slowly, "but I need to know more. What exactly are you offering here?" Ben's eyes flicked to the side, as though he were weighing his words carefully. "I'm offering you information. I've seen enough to know that Karen has been breaking rules and manipulating the HOA for her own gain. She's been playing both sides, using the system to get what she wants while silencing anyone who dares to challenge her." I raised an eyebrow. "And what do you want in return for this information?" "Nothing," he said flatly. "I'm tired of living in her shadow, and frankly, I don't like what she's doing to this neighborhood. I've had enough. I'm not trying to stir up trouble for myself, but I can't let her get away with this anymore. I'm offering this because it's the right thing to do." His words were simple, but there was something in his tone, a quiet fire, a certain conviction, that made me think he was genuine. I wasn't sure if I could trust him fully yet, but I wasn't going to let this opportunity slip by. "Okay," I said, nodding slowly. "I'll listen. What do you know?" Ben hesitated for a moment, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folder. It was thick, bulging with papers. I've kept track of her actions over the years. Every time she's pushed someone around, every time she's twisted the rules, I've written it down. I've kept receipts, legal documents, and photos of things she's done behind the scenes. I took the folder, feeling the weight of it in my hands. This could be useful. Are you sure you're ready for this? Going against Karen is one thing. Going against the HOA is another." Ben shrugged. "I'm ready. I've been holding on to this for too long. It's time for things to change." As I flipped through the folder, I could feel the pieces of the puzzle coming together. This wasn't just about the heating line anymore. Karen had been playing the long game, manipulating the system, stacking the odds in her favor. But now I had something that could truly take her down. There were emails, records of shady contracts, even pictures of Karen meeting with contractors on the sly. It was all there. But then, Ben leaned in closer and lowered his voice. "And there's one more thing. Something that could change everything. A piece of evidence that would completely destroy her credibility." I stopped flipping through the papers and looked at him, my heart pounding. "What is it?" He smiled slightly, a glint of satisfaction in his eyes. "I've got proof that Karen has been using HOA funds for personal gain. There's a bank statement, some transfers that went through. It's all there. If we expose that, she's finished." I felt the weight of his words settle over me. This was the kind of leverage I needed. The thing that would tip the scales in my favor. But I knew one thing for sure. Whatever Karen had planned next, she wasn't ready for what I was about to unleash. The days leading up to the final confrontation felt like a slow burn. Each moment, each decision, was like a piece of a carefully constructed puzzle that I was determined to finish. I could feel the pressure mounting, but I knew this was the moment I'd been preparing for. I wasn't going to confront Karen recklessly. I was going to hit her with everything I had, legally, strategically, and with undeniable evidence. Ben had been a crucial ally in all this. He was steady, reliable, and he knew the ropes. While I gathered documents, researched regulations, and made sure I was legally sound, he had been working on the ground, talking to other neighbors, gathering witness statements, and securing more pieces of the puzzle. The community was starting to come together, and the more we learned about Karen's behind-the-scenes actions, the more confident I became that this battle could be won. One evening, Ben stopped by again, the familiar folder in his hand. This time, it was thicker, and I could see that the weight of what was inside it was going to be significant. He came inside without a word, setting the folder down on my dining table. "I've got something," he said, his voice low. "Something that's going to make sure we win." I took the folder from him, flipping it open. Inside, there were legal documents, copies of HOA agreements, building codes, and even invoices from contractors Karen had been working with. But it wasn't the documents that made my pulse quicken. It was the bank statements. A set of transfers that Karen had made from the HOA's account to her personal one, more than once. The amount wasn't huge, but it didn't need to be. It was enough. And the timing? Perfect. Each transfer coincided with the times she'd been in meetings with contractors or when decisions had been made to increase neighborhood fees. This wasn't just a case of mismanagement, it was theft. And with that, I had the smoking gun I needed. I couldn't hide the grin that tugged at my lips. Ben watched me, a silent understanding between us. "This is it," I said quietly. "This is the evidence that will destroy her credibility." Ben nodded, but there was a wariness in his eyes. "Just don't be too sure. Karen won't go down without a fight. She'll probably try to spin this into something else, but if we go public with it, if we can get the board involved, it'll be over for her." I knew he was right. Karen wasn't someone who'd bow out quietly. But the evidence we had was airtight, and I wasn't about to let her manipulate the situation this time. Over the next few days, I worked relentlessly. I began compiling everything: documents, photos, witness statements, and the evidence of Karen's theft. I organized it all into a neat binder, ensuring everything was in order, perfectly laid out. I knew that when the time came, I'd need to present it flawlessly. Every detail had to be accounted for. The more I worked, the more I could feel the tension building. It wasn't just about the heating line anymore. It was about Karen's overreach and her disregard for the law. It was about showing her, and the rest of the HOA, that I wasn't afraid. That I wasn't just some homeowner to be walked all over. The night before the final confrontation, I reviewed everything one last time. I made sure I knew exactly what I was going to say, how I was going to say it. This wasn't going to be a shouting match. This was going to be methodical, calm, and precise. I had the facts on my side, and that was the most powerful weapon I had. The morning arrived. I felt a sense of calm settle over me. The time for talk was over. This was it. I had a meeting scheduled with the HOA board. Karen would be there, of course, and I knew this was the moment everything would change. Ben met me outside my house that morning, looking more serious than usual. "You ready for this?" he asked, his voice tight with anticipation. "I am," I replied, my own voice steady. "This is what we've been building up to." As we walked toward the HOA's meeting hall, I could feel the weight of everything I'd learned, everything I'd worked for, on my shoulders. But I didn't feel fear. I felt resolve. I wasn't going to let Karen's manipulation go unchallenged anymore. When we arrived at the meeting, the room was already buzzing with activity. The board members were seated around a large table, and Karen was standing at the head, holding court as usual. She looked up as we entered, her smile tightening when she saw Ben at my side. Well, Karen said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Richard, Ben, I'm glad you could make it. I hope we can all resolve this little matter today." Her words were meant to be condescending, but I didn't let them affect me. I walked to the front, placing the binder on the table. The board members exchanged uneasy glances, and Karen's smile faltered just slightly. "I think we can resolve this matter, Karen," I said, my voice calm but firm. "But it's going to be on my terms." I began to lay out the evidence. First, the bank transfers, clearly showing Karen's misuse of HOA funds. Then, I presented the photos and documents that proved she had been manipulating contractors and board decisions for personal gain. The room grew quiet, the weight of what I was presenting sinking in. Karen's face turned pale as she watched the evidence unfold, and I could feel the tension in the room. She tried to speak, but I held up a hand, stopping her before she could spin her usual lies. "You've been using the HOA to line your own pockets, Karen," I said, my voice cold. "And now, we're going to make sure the whole neighborhood knows about it." The board members looked at each other, and for the first time, I saw doubt in their eyes. They knew what Karen had been doing, but no one had the guts to challenge her, until now. I could tell Karen was scrambling, trying to figure out her next move. But there was no way she could talk her way out of this. The truth was out, and it was too late for her to stop it. I knew this would be the moment that changed everything. It was now or never. The atmosphere in the HOA meeting room was tense. The usual hum of idle chatter had been replaced by the stifling silence of uncertainty. I could feel the weight of the binder I was holding, the culmination of weeks of research, planning, and waiting. Ben stood beside me, just as calm as I was, but there was a fire in his eyes. He was ready for this. We both knew that this was the moment we'd been waiting for, the moment that would either make or break everything. Karen was at the head of the table, her arms crossed, eyes narrowed in a way that could only be described as smug. She wasn't used to being challenged. Not like this. She had always been the one to pull the strings, to control the narrative. But today, that was going to change. I could feel Karen's gaze on me as I walked up to the front of the room, every step deliberate, every breath controlled. The board members, most of whom had been under her thumb for years, were looking from Karen to me, their faces unreadable. But I could tell they were nervous. The whole dynamic had shifted, and they could feel it, too. I placed the binder down on the table in front of me, the sound of the pages settling onto the surface breaking the silence. The room was still, and for a brief moment, I savored it. This was my moment. No more waiting, no more playing by Karen's rules. This was my turn to expose the truth, and I wasn't going to waste it. "I've got something to show all of you," I said, my voice steady but firm. "Something you need to see." Karen shifted in her seat, her eyes narrowing. She was already on edge. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, trying to figure out what I was about to pull out. But she had no idea what was coming. I opened the binder and began laying out the evidence, one piece at a time. The bank transfers, the invoices, the photos of her meeting with contractors in secret. I watched as the board members leaned forward, their eyes scanning the documents. The tension in the room grew thicker, like a storm cloud on the verge of breaking. Karen's mask of confidence cracked just a little. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, trying to keep her voice steady. But there was a tremor in it now. "This is nothing but a smear campaign. Richard is trying to discredit me, trying to turn everyone against me with lies." I didn't flinch. I wasn't there to argue. I was there to present the facts. And the facts didn't lie. "Tell me, Karen," I said, looking her straight in the eye, "why were HOA funds transferred into your personal account, exactly? Several times, without any approval from the board? What was that money for?" Her eyes widened for a split second, then she quickly regained her composure. She tried to speak, but I cut her off. "And why did you arrange meetings with contractors without board knowledge? Why were decisions made in private that impacted the entire neighborhood? It's all here, in black and white." The board members shifted uneasily in their seats. I could see the doubt creeping into their minds. This wasn't just hearsay. This wasn't just some personal vendetta. This was solid, undeniable evidence that Karen had abused her power for personal gain. Karen tried again to regain control, but this time, she wasn't as convincing. "This is a misunderstanding. You're twisting things. I've always acted in the best interest of the neighborhood." Her voice grew louder, more desperate, but it didn't have the same authority it used to. The more she tried to manipulate the narrative, the more her desperation became evident. She was scrambling, and I wasn't about to let her wriggle her way out of this. I turned back to the board. "I think it's clear what's been going on here. Karen has been using her position to line her pockets and control the neighborhood. She's been making decisions in secret, stealing from all of you, and getting away with it because she thought no one would question her." The silence was deafening. The board members exchanged looks, unsure of what to do. I could feel the weight of their hesitation. They had been complicit in letting Karen do whatever she wanted for too long. But now, the truth was laid bare before them. and they couldn't ignore it anymore. "I've got one last thing," I said, as I reached into the binder and pulled out the final piece of evidence. It was a contract signed by Karen and a contractor for a renovation project that had been approved under false pretenses. I placed it in front of them. Karen wasn't just stealing from the HOA. She was making backroom deals with contractors, using HOA funds to pay for projects that benefited her personally. This is a direct violation of HOA rules and regulations. The board members were staring at the contract now, their expressions changing. I could see the realization dawning on them. This wasn't just a bad decision. This was fraud. Karen's face turned bright red, and for the first time, I saw her lose control. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is absurd," she shouted, her voice breaking. "You're all listening to him? He's lying. This is all just to get back at me for some stupid personal vendetta." I remained calm, standing firm. "You're the one who's been lying, Karen. You're the one who's been manipulating the system for your own gain. And now it's time for you to face the consequences." I turned back to the board. "This isn't just about me anymore. This is about the integrity of the HOA. It's about holding those in power accountable. If you let her get away with this, you're sending a message that corruption is acceptable. If you don't take action now, then you're complicit too." Karen opened her mouth to protest again, but the board members weren't listening anymore. They were looking at each other, whispering among themselves. I could see the doubt in their eyes, the hesitation fading away. They knew they couldn't ignore this any longer. Karen's face twisted in rage, but she couldn't argue with the evidence. The truth had been exposed, and there was nothing she could do to cover it up. Just as it seemed like Karen was about to make one final desperate attempt to regain control, she stopped. Her eyes darted around the room, and I could see her calculating her next move. But before she could speak, I already knew what was coming. I thought the battle was over. I began, my voice steady. But what I didn't expect was the last card Karen had up her sleeve. The tension in the room thickened once again, and I could feel the heat rising in the air. The final twist was just beginning to unfold. The weeks following the confrontation with Karen felt surreal, like I was watching a slowly unfolding film. Everything had changed, but it wasn't just because of the evidence we presented or the legal action we'd taken. The real shift was something deeper, a shift in the way the neighborhood saw itself, in how the power dynamics had been shaken, and in how people began to see Karen for who she truly was. The board members, those who had blindly followed Karen's lead for so long, were left scrambling. They knew they couldn't just sweep the scandal under the rug. The community had seen too much. There were too many neighbors now who had come forward, who were unwilling to tolerate Karen's manipulation any longer. After a few tense meetings, the HOA was no longer the entity it had been before. It was disbanded. Karen was ousted from her position as president, a decision that came swiftly but was long overdue. The once feared president, who had commanded so much control, now stood as an example of the dangers of unchecked power. And the neighborhood began to change. Slowly at first, but with growing momentum. People who had once kept their heads down started to speak up. At the next community gathering, more than one neighbor approached me. Some of them nodded in acknowledgement, others offered quiet thanks. They hadn't been as bold as I had been, but they had been watching. And now they knew that standing up for what was right wasn't as impossible as it had seemed before. I didn't want to take credit for everything, but there was a quiet satisfaction in the air. Karen's reign of terror had ended, and though the battle had been hard fought, it had been worth it. The truth had a way of coming to light, even when those in power did everything they could to hide it. I found myself walking around the neighborhood more often in the days that followed. People waved at me as I passed, some stopping to chat. It was different now. There was a sense of camaraderie that had never been there before. Neighbors who had once stayed in their homes, too afraid to question Karen's authority, now looked at each other as equals. The collective fear had dissipated, replaced by the confidence that comes from knowing you don't have to tolerate injustice. The day I realized things had really changed was when I bumped into Frank again. He stopped me on the sidewalk, his face lit up with a smile I hadn't seen in ages. "Hey, Richard, I just wanted to say thanks," he said, his voice sincere. "You know, I've been living here for 20 years, and I never thought I'd see the day when anyone would stand up to Karen. You've really done something for all of us. Things feel different now." I smiled back, feeling a warmth spread through me. It wasn't just me, Frank. There were a lot of people who were fed up with how things were going. They just needed someone to show them that it was okay to speak out. He nodded, his eyes serious now. Yeah, but you were the one who did it. You gave everyone a reason to believe. You made sure it wasn't just talk. I shrugged, but deep down, I knew he was right. My decision to stand up had triggered something bigger than just me. It had reminded everyone that they had a voice, that they didn't have to live in fear of a single person's control. Later that evening, Linda and I sat down to dinner in our kitchen, the same kitchen we'd shared for years, but it felt different now. Calmer, more settled. There was a lightness in the air that hadn't been there before. I'm proud of you, Rich, Linda said, her voice soft. She reached across the table, her hand brushing against mine. I know this hasn't been easy, but you did the right thing. I looked at her, the weight of everything still settling in, but with a sense of peace. I couldn't just let her get away with it. She wasn't just messing with me. She was messing with all of us. Linda smiled, her eyes full of warmth. And now you've made sure she can't hurt anyone else. You've changed the neighborhood for the better. We sat in silence for a few moments, letting that realization sink in. The world hadn't ended. It hadn't fallen apart. In fact, it felt like the opposite had happened. The community had come together. The house that once felt like just a home was now a symbol of something greater, a place where you could stand up for what was right, even when the odds were stacked against you. But as I sat there, reflecting on everything that had happened, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the last time I would have to stand up for what was right. Karen might have been defeated, but there were always going to be people like her. People who used power for their own gain. People who tried to control others. I knew I'd always be ready to fight for what mattered, to stand firm against injustice. But for now, the neighborhood was healing, and I had done what I set out to do. But I knew one thing for sure. This wouldn't be the last time I had to stand up for what's right. As I sit here now, looking back on everything that's happened, I can't help but reflect on the journey that brought me to this point. The fight wasn't just about a heating line, or the HOA, or even Karen's manipulation. It was about something much deeper, something personal. It was about standing up for what was right, even when the odds seemed stacked against you. It was about reclaiming control over my own life, my own property, and my own future. I'll be honest, there were moments when I doubted myself. When I wondered if it was worth the struggle, if the constant battle against the HOA and Karen's power plays was really making any difference. But then I'd remember the neighbors who were suffering in silence, the ones too afraid to speak out, and I knew that I couldn't back down. What I learned through all of this is something that stuck with me. Sometimes, the hardest thing isn't fighting back, it's knowing when to fight. It's about having the patience to wait for the right moment, to gather your strength and your strategy before you make your move. It's about not rushing in with anger, but instead standing back, observing, and then striking when you're ready. It's the power of strategy and knowing that victory isn't always about brute force. It's about using your mind. I also learned that standing up to authority doesn't mean you have to lose your composure. There were plenty of times when I wanted to shout, to tear down everything Karen had built, but I knew that wasn't the way to win. Staying calm, staying focused, and letting the facts speak for themselves. Those were the tools that made the difference. And in the end, that's what allowed me to come out on top. Karen, in her desperation, tried everything to control the narrative, to make me look like the villain, to discredit me. But when you have the truth on your side, it's like armor. You don't need to yell to be heard. You just need to stand firm, show what's real, and let the facts unfold. I think the most rewarding part of this experience wasn't just the victory over Karen or the HOA, but the way the community started to shift. People who had once been too afraid to speak out began to realize that they didn't have to live in fear. They didn't have to let one person dictate their lives. That was the real change. And for me, knowing that I was part of that shift, that I helped ignite that change, was more satisfying than any victory over an individual. Now, when I look at my neighbors, I see something different. We've all learned a valuable lesson from this ordeal. We've learned the importance of standing up for ourselves, of protecting our rights, and of not letting anyone take away our sense of control, whether it's in our own homes or in our own lives. The HOA might have been the catalyst for all of this, but what happened after was about reclaiming power. There's a saying that comes to mind. The price of freedom is eternal vigilance. It's not just about one fight, one victory. It's about the ongoing responsibility to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult, even when it's uncomfortable. And now, I know that no matter what comes next, I'll always be ready to fight for what matters. So, I want to leave you with this. Have you ever had to stand up to authority? To challenge something that felt unfair or unjust? What did you learn from that experience? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video and want to hear more stories about standing up to injustice, make sure to like this video and don't forget to subscribe to Confessions of HOA. We've got more stories coming your way, and I can't wait to share them with you. Until next time, stay strong and keep fighting for what's right.